Let's see what happens. In the beginning, there was darkness, clearly. Then we turned the light switch. Look. Check it out. Let's see. I got you on my. It does not look like that. Okay, so posts. Yes, that's the. I guess your mom was supposed to there. Okay, I got the email saying I was on. That's a good sign. Swans was for me. Oh, they did. That's nice of them. Cool. Okay, now I can post the random act of discordance. Okay, self-promo posting, self-promo posting. What? The hell? All right. What you working on? Trying to get all the Discord posts taken care of. Damn it, now we're starting to cough. I don't want that. Ah, that's what you're doing. Just pull it up so I can better come here and see. Okay, that is it. 9:04. Give it a couple minutes. I like the music you got going on yours. I really need to get music. Eventually it'll happen. I'm going to get those sound effects on my reading screens. Let's see. Fire crackling sounds good on yours, by the way. Go ahead and get over to my study real quick. There we go. Still 2 minutes before I get into the story, so. Oh, sorry, rubbing my model freaks. But tonight we're going to start with the Storks. Like I posted on Twitter earlier, we're going to do the Storks, Nightingale, and we're going to try to do the Wild Swans. That's maybe 60 or so pages of this book, so I'm going to try to take it easy on my reading because I'm still having coughing issues and whatnot. Yeah, some nice. It was hot tea when I got started. Between hot tea, cough syrup, bottled water, that should be good for tonight. My model. Get back on the camera. There we go. Okay. Okay. We have made it to the 10-minute mark, so we will get started. Thank everyone for coming in, lurking, listening, and generally being here. So, our first story for the night is the Storks. On the roof of a house situated at the extremity of a small town, a stork had built his nest. There sat the mother stork with her 4 young ones, who always stretched out their little black bills, which had not yet become red. Not far off, upon the parapet, erect and proud, stood the father stork. He had drawn one of his legs under him, being weary of standing on 2. You might have fancied him a carved in wood. He stood so motionless. It looks so grand, thought he, for my wife to have a sentinel to keep guard over her nest. People cannot know that I am her husband. They will certainly think that I am commanded to stand here. How well it looks. And so he remained standing on one leg. In the street below, a number of children were playing together. When they saw the storks, one of the liveliest among them began to sing as much as he could remember of some old rhymes about storks, in which he was soon joined by the others. Stork, stork, long-legged stork, into thy nest I pray thee walk. There sits thy mate with her 4 children so great. The first will hang like a cat, the second will burn, the third on a spit wheel turn, the 4th drowned dead as a rat. Wow. Kids are weird. Only listen to what the boys are singing, said the little storks. They say we shall be hanged and burnt. Never mind, said the mother. Don't listen to them. They will do you no harm. But the boys went on singing and pointed their fingers at the storks. Only one little boy, called Peter, said it was a sin to mock and tease animals, and that he would have nothing to do with it. The mother stork again tried to comfort her little ones. Never mind, said she. See how composedly your father is standing there, and upon one leg only. But we are so frightened, said the young ones, drawing their heads down into the nest. The next day, when the children were again assembled to play together and saw the storks, they began their song again. The first will hang like a cat, the second will burn. Are they really going to be hanged and burnt? Asked the young storks. No, indeed, said the mother. You shall learn to fly. I will teach you myself. Then we can fly over to the meadow and pay a visit to the frogs. They will bow to us in the water and say, croak, croak, and then we shall eat them. Will that not be nice? And what then? Asked the little storks. Then all the storks in the country will gather together. The autumnal exercise will begin. It is of the greatest consequence that you should fly very well by then, for every one who doesn't, the general will stab to death with his bill. So you must pay great attention when we begin to drill you, and learn very quickly. Then we shall really be killed after all, as the boys said. Oh, listen, they're singing about it. Attend to me and not to them, said the mother. After the grand exercise, we shall fly to warm countries, far, far away from here, over mountains and forests. We shall fly to Egypt, where there are 3-cornered stone houses whose summits reach the clouds. They are called pyramids, and they are older than they are possible storks to imagine. There is a river, too, which overflows its banks, so as to make the whole country like a marsh, and we shall go into the marsh and eat frogs. Oh, said the young ones. Yes, it is fanciful. One does nothing but eat all day long, and whilst we are so comfortable in this country, Not a single green leaf is left on the trees, and it is so cold that the clouds are frozen and fall upon the earth in little white pieces. She meant snow, but she could not express herself more clearly. And will the naughty boys be frozen in pieces too? Asked the young storks. No, they will not be frozen into pieces, but they will be nearly as badly off as if they were. They will be obliged to crowd around a little fire in their dark little rooms, while you, on the contrary, will be flying about in foreign lands, where there are beautiful flowers and warm sunshine. Well, time passed by, and the young storks grew so tall that when they stood upright in the nest, they could see the country around to a great distance. The father stork used to bring them every day the nicest little frogs, as well as snails, and all the other stork titbits he could find. Oh, it was so droll to see him show them his tricks. He would lay his head upon the trail, make a rattling noise with his bill, and then tell them such charming stories about all the moors. Now you must learn to fly, said the mother one day, and accordingly all the four young storks were obliged to come up into the parapet. Oh, how they trembled! And though they balanced themselves on their wings, they were very near falling. Only look at me, said the mother. This is the way you must hold your heads, and in this manner place your feet. 1, 2, 1, 2. This will help you get on. She flew a little way, and the young ones made an awkward spring after her. Bounce! Down they fell. Their bodies were heavy. I will not fly, said one of the young ones, and he crept back into the nest. I do not want to go to the warm countries. Do you want to be frozen to death during the winter? Shall the boys come and hang, burn, or roast you? Wait a little, I will call them. Oh no, said the little stork, and he began to hop about on the roof with the others. By the third day he could fly pretty well, and so they thought they could also sit and take their ease in the air. But bounce! Down they tumbled and found themselves obliged to make use of their wings. The boys now came into the street, singing their favorite song. Shall we not fly down and peck out their eyes? Said the young ones. No, leave them alone, said the mother. Attend to me. That is of much more importance. 1, 2, 3, now to the right. 1, 2, 3, now to the left. Around the chimney pot. That was very well. You managed your wings so neatly last time that I will permit you to come with me tomorrow to the marsh. Several first-rate stork families will be there with their children. Let it be said that mine are the prettiest and most well-behaved. And remember to stand very upright and to throw out your chest. That looks well and gives such an air of distinction. But are we not to take revenge on those rude boys? Asked the young one. Let them screech as much as they please. You will fly among the clouds. You will go to the land of the pyramids, when they must shiver with cold, and not have a single green leaf to look at, nor a single sweet apple to eat. Yes, we shall be revenged, whispered all the one to another, and then they were drilled again. All of the boys in town, the forwardest in singing nonsensical verses, was always the same one who had begun teasing the storks, a little urchin not more than 6 years old. The young storks indeed fancied him 100 years old because he was bigger than either their father or mother. And what should they know about the ages of children, or grown-up human beings? All their schemes of revenge were aimed at this little boy. He had been the first to tease them, and continued to do so. The young storks were highly excited about it, and the older they grew, the less they were inclined to endure persecution. Their mother, in order to pacify them, at last promised that they should be revenged, but not until the last day of their stay in this place. We must first see how well you behave yourselves at the grand exercise. If then you should fly badly, and the general should thrust his beak into your breasts, the boys will, in some measure, be proved in the right. Let me see how well you will behave. Yes, that you shall, said the young ones. And now they really took great pains, practiced every day, and at last flew so lightly and prettily that it was a pleasure to see them. Well, now came the autumn, and the storks assembled in order to fly together to the warm countries for the winter. What a practicing there was! Away they went over woods and fields, towns and villages, merely to see how well they could fly, for they had a long journey before them. But the young storks distinguished themselves so honorably that they were pronounced worthy of frogs and serpents. This was the highest character they could obtain. Now they were allowed to eat frogs and serpents, and accordingly they did eat them. Now we will have our revenge, said they. Very well, said the mother. I have been thinking what will be the best. I know where the pool is in, where all the little children lie until the storks come and take them to their parents. The pretty little things sleep and dream so pleasantly that they will never dream again. All parents like to have a little child, and all children like to have a little brother or sister. We will fly to the pool and fetch one for each of the boys who has not sung that wicked song, nor made a jest of the storks, and the other naughty children shall have none. But he who sung first the words of naughty rhymes, what a great ugly fellow! What shall we do to him? Cried the young storks. In the pools there lies a little child who has dreamed away his life. We will take it for him, and he will weep because he has only a little dead brother. But as to the good boy who said it was a sin to mock and tease animals, surely you have not forgotten him. We will bring him two little ones, a brother and a sister. And this little boy's name is Peter. You too shall for the future be called Peter. And it came to pass just as the mother said, and all the storks were called Peter, and are still so called to this very day. Did not know Peter was the name of a stork. I know Peter Twerk, but he's a monkey. Okay. I'm aging myself. I wouldn't don't age myself, honestly. Okay. Keep going just where my model is. I'm not sure why. Anyway. Our second tale for the night. The Nightingale. In China, as you well know, the emperor is Chinese, and all around him are Chinese also. And now what am I about to relate happened many years ago. But even on the very account that this is most important that you should hear the story now, before it is forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most magnificent palace in the world. It was made entirely of fine porcelain, exceedingly costly, but at the same time so brittle that it was dangerous even to touch it. The choicest flowers were to be seen in the garden, and the most splendid of all these little silver bells were fastened, in order that their tinkling might prevent anyone from passing by without noticing them. Yes, everything in the Emperor's garden was excellently well arranged, and the garden extended so far that even the gardener did not know the end of it. Whoever walked beyond it, however, came to a beautiful wood, with a very high trees, and beyond that, to the sea. The wood went down quite to the sea, which was very deep and blue. Large ships could sail close under the branches, and among the branches dwelt a nightingale, who sang so sweetly that even the poor fisherman, who had so much else to do when he came out at night time to cast his nets, would stand still and listen to her song. "Oh, how pretty that is," he would say. But then he was obliged to mind his work and forget the bird. Yet the following night again the nightingale sang, and the fisherman came out, and again he would say, "Oh, how pretty that is." Travelers came from all parts of the world to the emperor's city, and they admired the city, the palace, and the garden. But if they heard the nightingale, they all said, "This is the best." And they talked about her after they went home. And learned men wrote books about the city, the palace, the garden, nor did they forget the nightingale. She was extolled above everything else, and poets wrote the most beautiful verses about the nightingale of the wood near the sea. These books went around the world, and one of them at last reached the emperor. He was sitting in his golden armchair, and read, and nodded his head at every moment, for these splendid descriptions of the city, the palace, and the garden pleased him greatly. But the nightingale is the best of all, was written in the book. "What in the world is this?" said the emperor. "The nightingale? I do not know it at all. Can there be such a bird in my empire, in my garden even, without my having heard of it? Truly one may learn something from books." So he called his cavalier, that is, his gentleman in waiting. And now this was so grand a personage that no one of inferior rank might speak to him, and if one did venture to ask him a question, his only answer was "Pish," which was no particular meaning. "There is said to be a remarkable bird here called the nightingale," said the emperor. "Her song, they say, is worth more than anything else in all my dominations. Why has no one ever told me of her?" "I have never before heard her mentioned," said the cavalier. "She has never been presented at court." "I wish her to come and sing before me this evening," said the emperor. "The whole world knows what I have, and I do not know it myself." "I have never before heard her mentioned lately," said the cavalier. "But I will seek her out, and I will find her." But where was she to be found? The cavalier ran up one flight of steps, and down another, through the halls, and through passages of steps. Not one of them, not one of all whom he met, had ever heard of the nightingale. And the cavalier returned to the emperor, and said, "It must certainly be an invention of the man who wrote the book. Your imperial majesty must not believe all that is written in books. Much of them is pure invention, and there is what is called the black art. But the book in which I have read it," said the emperor, "was sent to me by the high and mighty emperor of Japan, and therefore it cannot be untrue. I wish to hear the nightingale. She must be here this evening, and if she does not come after supper, the whole court shall be flogged. Singpe, said the cavalier, and he ran upstairs and downstairs, through halls and through passages, and half the court ran with him, for not one would have relished the flogging. Many were the questions asked respecting the wonderful Nightingale, whom the whole world talked of, and about whom no one at the court knew anything. At last they met a poor little girl in the kitchen, who said, "Oh, yes, the Nightingale. I know her very well. Oh, how she can sing! Every evening I carry the fragments left at the table to my poor sick mother. She lives by the seashore, and when I am coming back and stay to rest a little in the wood, I hear the Nightingale sing. It makes tears come to my eyes. It is just as if my mother kissed me." "Little kitchen maid," said the cavalier, "I will procure for you a sure appointment in the kitchen, together with permission to see His Majesty the Emperor dine, if you will conduct us to the Nightingale, for she is expected at court this evening." So they went together to the wood, where the Nightingale was accustomed to sing, and half the court went with them. Whilst on their way, a cow began to low. "Oh," said the court pages, "now we must have her. It is certainly an extraordinary voice for so small an animal. Surely I have heard it somewhere before." "No, those are cows you hear lowing," said the little kitchen maid. "We are still far from the place." The frogs were now croaking in the pond. "That is famous," said the chief court preacher. "Now I hear her. It sounds just like little church bells." "No, those are frogs," said the little kitchen maid. "But now I think we shall soon hear her." Then began the Nightingale to sing. "There she is," said the little girl. "Listen, listen, there she sits." And she pointed to a little gray bird up in the branches. "Is it possible?" said the cavalier. "I should not have thought it. How simple she looks! She must certainly have changed color at the sight of so many distinguished personages." "Little Nightingale," cried out the kitchen maid, "our gracious Emperor wishes you to sing something to him." "With the greatest pleasure," said the Nightingale, and she sang in such a manner that it was delightful to hear. "It sounds like glass bells," said the cavalier. "And look at her little throat, how it moves. It is singular that we should never have heard her before. She will have great success at the court." "Shall I sing again to the Emperor?" asked the Nightingale, for she thought the Emperor was among them. "Most excellent Nightingale," said the cavalier, "I have the honor to invite you to the court festival, which is to take place this evening, when His Imperial Majesty will be enchanted with your beautiful song." "My song will sound far better among the green trees," said the little Nightingale. However, she followed willingly when she heard the Emperor wished it. There was a regular trimming and polishing at the palace. The walls and floors, which were all porcelain, glittered with 1,000 gold lamps, the loveliest flowers, and the merriest tinkling bells, which were placed by the passages. There was a running to and fro which made all the bells to ring, so that one could not hear his own words. In the midst of the grand hall, where the Emperor sat, a golden perch was erected, on which the Nightingale was to sit. The whole court was present, and the little kitchen maid received permission to stand behind the door, for she now actually had the rank and title of maid of the kitchen. All were dressed out in their finest clothes, and all eyes were fixed upon the little gray bird, to whom the Emperor nodded as a signal for her to sing. And the Nightingale sang so sweetly that tears came into the emperor's eyes. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and the nightingale sang more sweetly still, and touched the hearts of all those who heard her. And the emperor was so merry that he said, "The nightingale should have his golden slippers, and wear them around her neck." That's stupid. But the nightingale thanked him and said she already was sufficiently rewarded. "I have seen tears in the emperor's eyes. That is the greatest reward I can have. The tears of an emperor have a particular value. Heaven knows I am sufficiently rewarded." And she sang again with her sweet, lovely voice. "It is the most amiable cookery ever known," said the ladies present, and they put water in their mouths and tried to move their throats as she did when they spoke, though they thought to become nightingales also. Indeed, even the footmen and chambermaids declared that they were quite contented, which was a great thing to say, for of all people they were the most difficult to satisfy. Yes, indeed, the nightingale's success was complete. She was now to remain at court, to have her own cage, with permission to fly out twice in a day and once in the night. 12 attendants were allotted to her, who were to hold silken band fastened around her foot, and they kept good hold. There was no pleasure in excursions made in this manner. All the city was talking of the wonderful bird, and when two persons met, one would say only "night," the other "gale," and then they sighed, and understood each other perfectly. Indeed, 11 of the children of the citizens were named after the nightingale, and none of them had had her tones in their throats. One day a large parcel arrived for the emperor, on which it was written "Nightingale." "Here we have another new book about the far famed bird," said the emperor. But it was not a book, it was a little piece of a mechanism lying in a box, an artificial nightingale, which was intended to look like a living one, but it was covered all in diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. But when this artificial bird had been wound up, it could sing out one of the tunes the real nightingale sang, and its tail, all glittering with silver and gold, went up and down the whole time. A little band was fastened around its neck, on which was written, "The nightingale of the Emperor of China is poor compared to the nightingale of the Emperor of Japan." "That is famous," said everyone, and he who had brought the bird obtained the title Chief Imperial Nightingale Bringer. "Now they shall sing together. We will have a duet." And so they must sing together, but it did not succeed, for the real nightingale sang in her own way, and the artificial bird produced its tones by wheels. "It is not his fault," said the artist. "He keeps exact time and quite according to method." So the artificial bird must now sing alone. He is quite as successful as the real nightingale, and then he was so much prettier to look at. His plumage sparkled like jewels. 33 times he sang one and the same tune, and yet he was not weary. Everyone would willingly have heard him again. However, the emperor now wished the real nightingale should sing something. But where was she? No one had remarked that she had flown out the open window, flown away to her own green wood. "What is the meaning of this?" said the emperor, and all the courtiers abused the nightingale, called her the most ungrateful creature. "We have the best bird at all events," they said. And for the 34th time they heard the same tune, but still they did not quite know it, because it was so difficult. The artist praised the bird inordinately, Indeed, he declared it was superior to the real Nightingale, not only in its exterior, all sparkling in diamonds, but also intrinsically. For see, my noble lords, his imperial majesty especially, with the real Nightingale, one could never reckon on what was coming. But everything is settled with the artificial bird. He will sing in this one way, and no other. This can be proved. He can be taken to pieces, and if the works can be shown where the wheels lie, how they move, and how one follows one from another. That is just what I think, said everybody, and the artist received permission to show the bird to the people on the following Sunday. They too should hear him sing, the emperor said. So they heard him, and were well pleased, as if they had been drinking tea. For it is tea that makes Chinese merry, and they all say so, and raised their forefingers and nodded their heads. But the fisherman, who had heard the real Nightingale, said, "It sounds very pretty, almost like the real bird, but yet there is something wanting. I do not know what." The real Nightingale was, however, banished to the empire. The artificial bird has its place on a silken cushion close to the emperor's bed. All the presents he received, gold and precious stones, lay around him. He had obtained the rank and title of High Imperial Dessert Singer, and therefore his place was number one on the left side. For the emperor thought that she where the heart was situated must be the most honorable. And the heart is situated on the left side of an emperor, as well as with other folks. And the artist wrote 25 volumes about the artificial bird, with the longest and most difficult words that are to be found in the Chinese language. So, of course, all said they had read and understood them. Otherwise, they would have been stupid, and perhaps would have been flogged. Then it went on for a year. The emperor, the court, and all the Chinese knew every note of the artificial bird's song by heart. But that was the very reason they enjoyed it so much. They could now sing with him. The little boys on the street sang, "Zississy cluck cluck cluck." And the emperor himself sang too. Yes, indeed. That was charming. But one evening, when the bird was in full voice and the emperor lay in bed and listened, there was suddenly a noise. "Bang!" said the bird. Then something sprang. All the wheels were running about, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped quickly out of bed and had his chief physician called. But of what use could he be? Then a clockmaker was fetched, and at last, after a great deal of discussion and consultation, the bird was in some measure put to rights again. But the clockmaker had said it must be spared such singing, for the pegs were almost worn out, and it was impossible to renew them, at least so that the music could be correct. There was a great lamentation, for now the artificial bird was allowed to sing only once a year. And even then, there were difficulties. However, the artist made a short speech full of his favorite long words, and said the bird was as good as ever, so then, of course, it was as good as ever. When 5 years were passed away, a great affliction visited the whole empire, for in their hearts the people thought highly of their emperor, and now he was ill, and it was reported that he could not live. A new emperor had already been chosen, and the people stood in the streets outside the palace and asked the cavalier how the emperor was. "Pish!" he said, and shook his head. Cold and pale lay the emperor in his magnificent bed. All of the court believed him to be already dead, and everyone had hastened away to greet the new emperor. The men ran out for a little gossip on the subject, and the maids were having a grand coffee party. Coffee. The floors of all the rooms and passages were covered with cloth, in order that not a step should be heard. It was everywhere so still, so still. But the emperor was not yet dead. Stiff and pale, he lay on his splendid bed, with long velvet curtains and heavy gold tassels. A window was opened above, and the moon shone down on the emperor and his artificial bird. The poor emperor could scarcely breathe. It appeared to him as though something was sitting on his chest. He opened his eyes and saw that it was death, who had put on the emperor's crown with one hand held a golden scimitar, with the other the splendid imperial banner, whilst from under the folds of the thick velvet hangings the strangest looking heads were seen peering forth, some with an expression absolutely hideous, the others with an extremely gentle, loving aspect. They were the bad and good deeds of the emperor, which were now all fixing their eyes upon him, whilst death sat on his heart. "Dost thou know this?" they whispered one after another. "Dost thou remember that?" And they began reproaching him in such a manner that the sweat broke upon his forehead. "I have never known anything like it," said the emperor. "Music, music, the great Chinese drum," cried he. "Let me not hear what they are saying." And they went on, however, and Death, quite in the Chinese fashion, nodded his head to every word. "Music, music," cried the emperor. "Thou dear little artificial bird, sing, I pray thee, sing. I have given thee gold and precious stones. I have even hung my golden slippers around thy neck. Sing, I pray thee, sing." But the bird was silent. There was no one there to wind him up, and he could not sing without this. Death continued to stare at the emperor with his great hollow eyes, and everywhere it was still, fearfully still. All at once the sweetest song was heard from the window. It was a little living nightingale who was sitting on a branch outside. She had heard of the emperor's severe illness and was come to sing to him in comfort of hope. And she sang. The spectral forms became paler and paler. The blood flowed more and more quickly through the emperor's feeble members, and even Death listened and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on." "Will thou give me the splendid gold scimitar? Will thou give me the gay banner, and the emperor's crown?" And Death gave up all these treasures for a song, and the nightingale sang on. She sang of the quiet churchyard, where the white roses blossom, where the lilac sends forth its fragrance, and the fresh grass is wetted with the tears of the sorrowing friends of the departed. Then Death seized with a longing after his garden, and like a cold white shadow flew out the window. "Thanks, thanks," said the emperor, "thou heavenly little bird. I know thee well. I have banished thee from my realm, and thou hast sung away the evil faces from my bed, death from my heart. How shall I reward thee?" "Thou hast already rewarded me," said the nightingale. "I have seen tears in thine eyes, as when I sang to thee for the first time. Those I shall never forget. They are jewels which do so much good to a minstrel's heart. But sleep now, and wake fresh and healthy. I will sing thee to sleep." And she sang, and the emperor fell into a sweet sleep. Oh, how soft and kindly was that sleep! The sun shone in at the window when he awoke, strong and healthy. Not one of his servants had returned, for they all believed him dead. But the nightingale sat and sang. Thou shalt always stay with me, said the emperor. Thou shalt only sing when it pleases thee, and the artificial bird I will break into 1,000 pieces. Do not so, said the nightingale. Truly he has done what he could. Take care of him. I cannot stay in the palace, but let me come when I like. I will sit on the branches close to the window in the evening and sing to thee, that thou mayest become happy and thoughtful. I will sing to thee of the joyful and the sorrowing. I will sing to thee of all the good and the bad, which is concealed from thee. A little minstrel flies afar from the fisherman's huts to the peasant's college, to all who are far in distance from thee and thy court. I love thy heart more than thy crown, and yet the crown has an odor of something holy about it. I will come, I will sing, but thou must promise me one thing. Everything, said the emperor. And now he stood in his imperial splendor, which he had put on himself, and held a scimitar so heavy with gold to his heart. One thing I beg of thee, let no one know thou hast a little bird, who tells thee everything, then all will go on well. And the nightingale flew away. The attendants came in to look on their dead emperor, though there they stood. And the emperor said, Good morning. Oh. Nightingale kind of came synonymous with nurse. Nightingales are going around healing people with their songs. Okay, we have only gone an hour. Altered nobody's coming. So we will continue to the last story I said we would do tonight. The Wild Swans. Far hence, in a country whither swallows fly in our winter time, there dwelt a king who had 11 sons and one daughter, the beautiful Elise. The 11 brothers, they were princes, went to school with stars on their breasts and swords by their sides, and they wrote on golden tablets with diamond pens, and they could read either with a book or without them. In short, it was easy to perceive that they were princes. Their sister Elise used to sit upon a little glass stool, and had a picture book which had cost half the kingdom. Oh, the children were so very happy, but happy they would not remain always. Their father, the king, was married to a very wicked queen, who was not at all kind to the poor children. They found this out on the first day after the marriage, when there was a grand gala at the palace. For when the children played at receiving company, instead of having as many cakes and sweetmeats as they liked, sweetmeats, the queen gave them only some sand and a little dish, and told them to imagine that was something else. The week after, she sent the little Elise to be brought up by some peasants in the country, and it was not long before she told the king so many falsehoods about the poor princes that they would have nothing more to do with them. Away, out into the world, and take care of yourselves, said the wicked queen. fly away in the form of great speechless birds. But she could not make their transformation so disagreeable as she wished. The princes were changed into 11 white swans. Sending forth a strange cry, they flew out of the palace windows, over the park, and over the wood. It was still early in the morning when they passed by the place where Elise lay sleeping in the peasant's cottage. They flew several times around the roof, stretched out their long necks, and flapped their wings, but no one either heard or saw them. They were forced to fly away, up into the clouds, and into the wide world. So on they went to the forest, which extended as far as the seashore. Poor little Elise stood within the peasant's cottage, amusing herself with the green leaf, for she had no other plaything. She pricked a hole in the leaf and peeped through it at the sun, and then she fancied she saw her brother's bright eyes, and whenever the warm sunbeams shone upon her cheeks, she thought of her brother's kisses. One day passed exactly like the other. When the wind blew through the thick hedge of rose trees in front of the house, she would whisper to the roses, "Who is more beautiful than you?" But the roses would shake their heads and say, "Elise." And then the peasant's wife sat on Sundays at the door in her cottage reading the hymn book. The wind would rustle in the leaves and say to the book, "Who is more pious than thou?" "Elise," replied the hymn book. And what the roses in the hymn book said was no more than the truth. Elise was now 15 years old. She was sent for home, but when the queen saw how beautiful she was, she hated her all the more, and would willingly have transformed her, like her brothers, into a wild swan. But she dared not do so, because the king wished to see his daughter. So the next morning the queen went into the bath, which was made of marble, and fitted up the soft pillows and the gayest carpets. She took 3 toads, kissed them, and said to one, "Settle thou upon Elisa's head, that she may become dull and sleepy like thee." "Settle upon her forehead," said she to another, "and let her become ugly like thee, so that her father may not know her again. And do thou place thyself upon her bosom," whispered to the third, "that her heart may become corrupt and evil, a torment to herself." Then she put the toads onto the clear water, which was immediately tinted with a green color, and having called Elise, took off her clothes and made her get into the bath. One toad settled among her hair, another on her forehead, and the third upon her bosom. But Elise seemed not at all aware of it. She rose up, and 3 poppies were seen swimming on the water. Had not the animals been poisonous and kissed by a witch, they would have changed into roses while they remained on Elise's head and heart. She was too good for magic to be used of any power over her. When the queen perceived this, she rubbed walnut juice all over the maiden's skin, so that it became quite swarthy, smeared a nasty salve over her lovely face, and entangled her long, thick hair. It was impossible to recognize the beautiful Elise after this. Okay, cool. When her father saw her, he was shocked, and said she could not be his daughter. No one would have anything to do with her, but the mastiff and the swallows. But they, poor things, could not say anything in her favor. Poor Elise wept, and though thought of her 11 brothers, not one of whom she saw at the palace. In great distress she stole away and wandered the whole day over fields and moors, till she reached the forest. She knew not where to go, but she was so sad and longed so much to see her brothers, who had been driven into the world, that she determined to seek and find them. She had not been long in the forest when night came, and she lost her way under the darkness. She lay down on the soft moss and said her evening prayer, and leaned her head against the trunk of a tree. It was so still in the forest. The air was mild, and from the grass and mold around gleamed green light of many hundred glowworms. And when Elise lightly touched one of the branches hanging over her, bright insects fell down upon her like falling stars. All the night long she dreamed of her brothers. They were all children again, playing together, wrote with diamond pens on golden tablets, and looked at the pictures in the beautiful book which she had cost half the kingdom. But they did not, as formerly, make straight strokes of dogs upon the tables. No, they wrote in bold actions they had performed, and the strange adventures they had encountered. And in the picture book everything seemed alive. The birds sang, men and women stepped from the book and talked to Elise and her brothers. However, when she turned over the leaves, they jumped back into their places, so that the pictures would not get confused together. When Elise awoke, the sun was already high in the heavens. She could not see it certainly, for the tall trees of the forest entwined their thickly leaved branches closer together, which, as the sunbeams played upon them, looked like a golden veil waving to and fro. And the air was so fragrant, and the birds perched upon Elise's shoulders. She heard the noise of water. There were several springs forming a pool, with the prettiest pebbles at the bottom. Bushes were growing thickly around them, but the deer had trodden the broad path through them, and by this path Elise went down to the water's edge. The water was so clear that had not the boughs and bushes been moved to and fro by the wind, you might have fancied they were painted upon a smooth surface, so distinctly that each little leaf mirrored upon it, whether glowing in the sunlight or lying in the shade. As soon as Elise saw her face reflected in the water, she was quite startled. So brown and ugly did it look. However, when she wetted her little hand and rubbed her brows and eyes, the white skin again appeared. So Elise took off her clothes, stepped into the fresh water, and in the whole world there was not a king's daughter more beautiful than she appeared. After she had dressed again and braided her long hair, she went back to the bubbling spring and drank out of the hollow of her hand, and then wandered farther into the forest. She knew not where she was going, but she thought of her brothers, and of the good God who, she felt, would never forsake her. He it is who was made the wild crab trees grow in order to feed the hungry, and who showed her a tree whose boughs bent under the weight of their fruit. She made her noonday meal under its shade, propped up the boughs, and then walked on amid the dark twilight of the forest. It was so still that she could hear her own footsteps and the rustling of each little withered leaf that was crushed beneath her feet. Not a bird was to be seen, not a single sunbeam penetrated through the thick foliage, and the tall stems of the trees stood so close together that when she looked straight before her she seemed enclosed by the trellis work on trellis work. Oh, there was a solitariness in the woods such as Elise had never known before, and the night was so dark. Not a single glowworm sent forth its lights. Sad and melancholy she lay down to sleep, and then it seemed to her as though the boughs above her opened, and that she saw the angel of God looking down upon her with gentle aspect, and 1,000 little cherubs all around him. When she awoke in the morning, she could not tell whether this was a dream or whether she had really been so watched. She walked on a little farther and met an old woman with a basket full of berries. The old woman gave her some of them, and Elise asked if she had not seen 11 princes ride through the wood. "No," said the old woman, "but I saw yesterday 11 swans with golden crowns on their heads swim down the brook near the palace." And she led Elise on a little further to the precipice, the base of which was washed by a brook. The trees on each side stretched their long, leafy branches toward each other, and where they could not unite, the roots had disengaged themselves from the earth and hung their interlaced fibers over the water. Elise bade the old woman farewell and wandered by the side of the stream till she came to the place where it reached the open sea. The great and beautiful sea lay extended beyond the maiden's eyes, but not a ship, not a boat was to be seen. How was she to go on? She observed the numberless little stones on the shore, all of which the waves had washed into a round form. Glass, iron, stone, everything that lay scattered there had been molded into shape. And yet the water which had affected this was much softer than Lisa's delicate little hand. "It rolls on unweariedly," said she, "and subdues what is so hard. I will be no less unwearied. Thank you for the lesson you have given me, you bright rolling waves. Some day, my heart tells me, you shall carry me to my dear brothers." There lay upon the wet sea grass 11 white swan feathers. Elise collected them together. Drops of water hung about them, whether dew or tears she could not tell. She was quite alone on the seashore, but she did not care for that. The sea presented an eternal variety to her, more indeed in a few hours than the gentle inland waters could have offered in a whole year. When a black cloud passed over the sky, it seemed as if the sea would say, "I too can look dark." And then the wind would blow, and the waves would fling their white foam. And when the clouds shone with the bright red tints, and the winds were asleep, the sea also became like a rose leaf in hue. It was now green, now white. But as it reposed peacefully, a slight breeze on the shore caused the water to heave gently like the bosom of a sleeping child. At sunset, Elise saw 11 wild swans, with gold crowns on their heads, fly towards the land. They flew one behind another, looking like a stream of white ribbon. Elise climbed the precipice and concealed herself behind a bush. The swans settled close to her and flapped their long white wings. As the sun sank beneath the waves, the swans also vanished, and in their place stood 11 handsome princes, the brothers of Elise. She uttered a loud cry, for, although they were very much altered, Elise knew that they were, felt that they must be, her brothers. She ran into their arms and called them by their names. Oh, how happy they were to see and recognize their sister, who was now grown so tall and beautiful. They laughed and wept, and soon told each other how wickedly their stepmother had acted towards them. "We," said the oldest of the brothers, "fly or swim as long as the sun is above the horizon, but when it sinks below, we appear again in our human form. We are therefore obliged to look out for a safe resting place, for if the sun sets while we were flying among the clouds, we should fall down as soon as we resumed our form. We do not dwell here. A land quite as beautiful as this lies on the opposite side of the sea, but it is far off. To reach it we have to cross the deep waters, and there is no island midway on which we can rest for the night. Only a solitary little rock rises from the waves, and upon it we must find enough room to stand side by side. There we spend the night in our human forms, and When the sea is rough, we are sprinkled with its foam, but we are thankful for this resting place, for without it we should never be able to visit our dear native country. Only once in a year is this visit the home of our fathers permitted. We require 2 of the longest days for our flight, and we can remain here only 11 days, during which time we fly over a large forest, whence we can see the palace in which we were born, where our father dwells, and the tower of the church in which our mother is buried. Here, even the trees and bushes seem as kin to us. Here, the wild horses still race over the plains, and in the days of our childhood, here the charcoal burner still sings the same tunes as which we danced in our youth. Here we are still attracted, and here we have found thee, our dear little sister. We have yet 2 days longer to stay here, then we must fly over the sea to the land beautiful indeed, but not our fatherland. How shall we take thee with us? We have neither ship nor boat. How shall I be able to release you? Said the sister. And they went on talking almost the whole night. They slumbered only a few hours. Elise was awakened by the rustling of Swan's wings, which were fluttering above her. Her brothers again transformed, and for some time flew around in large circles. At last they flew far, far away. One of them remained behind. It was the youngest. He lay his head on her lap, and she stroked his white wings. They remained the whole day together. Toward evening the others came back. When the sun was set again, they stood on the firm ground in their natural forms. Tomorrow we shall fly away, and may not return for a year. But we cannot leave thee. Hast thou courage to accompany us? My arms are not strong enough to bear thee through the forest. Shall we not have sufficient strength in our wings to transport thee over the sea? Yes, take me with you, said Lise. They spent the whole night in weaving a mat of giant pillow of the plant's willow bark and the tough bushes. And as their mat was thick and strong, Elise lay down upon it. And when the sun had risen, her brothers were again transformed into wild swans. They seized the mat with their beaks and flew high up among the clouds with their dear sister, who was still sleeping. The sunbeam shone full upon her face, so one of the swans flew over her head and shaded her with its broad wings. But they were already far from land when Elise woke. She thought she was still dreaming. So strange did it appear to her that traveling through the air and over the sea, and her side lay a cluster of pretty berries and a handful of savory roots. Her youngest brother had collected them and laid them there. Then she thanked him with a smile, for she knew he was the swan who flew over her head and shaded her with his wings. They flew so high that the first ship they saw beneath them seemed like a white seagull hovering over the water. Elise saw behind her a large cloud. It looked like a mountain, and on it sat the gigantic shadows of herself and the 11 swans. It formed a picture more splendid than any she had ever seen. Soon, however, the sun rose higher. The cloud remained far behind, and then the floating, shadowy picture disappeared. The whole day they continued flying with a whizzing noise, somewhat like an arrow. But they had went slower than usual. They had their sister to carry. A heavy tempest was gathering, and the evening approached. Anxiously did Elise watch the sun. It was setting. Still, the solitary rock could not be seen. It appeared to her that the swans plied their wings with increasing vigor. Alas, it would be her fault if her brothers did not arrive at the place in time. And they would become human beings when the sun set, and if this happened before they reached the rock, they must fall into the sea and be drowned. She prayed to God most fervently. Still no rock was to be seen. The black clouds drew nearer. Violent gusts of wind announced the approach of a tempest. The clouds rested perpendicular upon the fearfully large wave which rolled quickly forward. One flash of lightning, repeated rapidly, succeeded another. The sun was now on the rim of the sea. Elisa's heart beat violently. The swans shot downward so swiftly that she thought she must fall, and again they began to hover. The sun was half sunk beneath the water, and at that moment she saw the little rock below her. It looked like a seal's head when it rises just above the water. The sun was sinking fast, and it seemed scarcely larger than a star. Her foot touched the hard ground, and it vanished altogether, like the last spark of a burnt piece of paper. Arm in arm stood her brothers around her. There, as only room for her and them, the sea beat tempestuously against the rocks, flinging over them a shower of foam. The sea seemed to be a continual blaze with the fast succeeding flashes of that fire that lightened it. Then peal after peal rolled on the thunder. But sister and brothers kept firm hold of each other's hands. They sang a song, and their song gave them courage and comfort. By daybreak the air was pure and still, and as soon as the sun rose, the swans flew away with Elise from the rock. The waves rose higher and higher, and when they looked from the clouds down upon the blackish gray sea, covered as it was with white foam, they might have fancied that millions of swans were swimming on its surface. As day advanced, Elise saw floating in the air before her a land of mountains intermixed with glaciers, and in the center a palace a mile in length, with splendid colonnades surrounded by palm trees and gorgeous flowing flowers as large as mill wheels. She asked if this was the country in which they were flying, but the swans shook their head, for what she saw was the beautiful airy castle of the fairy Morgana. There no human being was admitted, and whilst Elise still bent her eyes upon it, mountains and trees and castle all disappeared, and in their place stood 12 churches with high towers and pointed windows. She fancied she heard an organ play, but it was only a murmur above the sea. She was now close to these churches, and behold, they have changed into a large fleet sailing under them. She looked down and saw it was only sea mist passing rapidly over the water. An eternal variety floated before her eyes, till at last the actual land to which she was going appeared in sight. Beautiful blue mountains, cedar woods, towns, and castles rose to view. Long before sunset, Least down among the mountains in front of a cavern, delicate young creepers grew around so quickly that they appeared covered with gay embroidered carpets. "Now we shall see what thou wilt dream tonight," said the youngest brother, as he showed her the sleeping chamber destined for her. "Oh, that I could dream how you might be released from the spell," she said, and this thought completely occupied her. She prayed almost earnestly for God's assistance. Nay, even in her dream she continued praying, and it appeared to her that she was flying up high in the air towards the castle of the fairy Morgana. The fairy came forward to meet her, radiant and beautiful, and yet she fancied she resembled an old woman who had given her berries of the forest, and told her of the swans with the golden crowns. "Thou canst release thy brother," she said, "but hast thou courage and patience sufficient? The water is indeed softer than thy delicate hands, and yet can mould the hardened stones as it will. But then it cannot feel the pain which thy tender fingers will feel. It has no heart, and cannot suffer the anxiety and grief which thou must suffer. Dost thou see these stinging nettles which I have in my hand? There are many of the same kind growing around the cave where thou art sleeping. Only those that grow there and on the graves of the churchyard are of use. Remember that. Thou must pluck them. Although thou wilt sting my hand, thou must trample on the nettles with thy feet, and get yarn from them. And with this yarn thou must weave 11 shirts with long sleeves. Throw them over the 11 wild swans, and the spell is broken. But mark this, from the moment that thou beginnest thy work till it is completed, even should it occupy thee for years, thou must not speak a word. The first syllable that escapes thy lips will fall like a dagger into the hearts of thy brothers, for thy tongue depends on thy life. Mark well at this. And at the same moment the fairy touched Elise's hands with the nettle, which made them burn like fire, and Elise woke. It was broad daylight, and close to her lay a nettle like the one she had seen in her dreams. She fell upon her knees, thanked God, and then went out of the cave in order to begin her work. She plucked with her own delicate hands the disagreeable, stinging nettles. They burned large blisters on her hands and arms, but they bore the pain willingly in the hope of releasing her dear brothers. She trampled on the nettles with her naked feet, and spun the green yarn. As sunset came, her brothers, Elise's silence quite frightened them. They thought it must be the effect of some fresh spell of their wicked stepmother. But when they saw her blistered hands, they found out that their sister was doing this for their sakes. The youngest brother wept, and when his tears fell upon her hands, Elise felt no more pain, and the blisters disappeared. The whole night she spent on work, for she could not rest till she had released her brothers. All the following day she sat in her solitude, for the swans had flown away, but never had time passed so quickly. One shirt was ready. She now began the second. Suddenly a hunting horn resounded among the mountains. Elise was frightened. The noise came nearer, and she heard the hounds barking. It was a terrible horror that she fled into the cave, bound up in the nettles which she had gathered and combed into a bundle, and sat down upon it. In the same moment a large dog sprang from the bushes, and 2 others immediately followed. They barked loudly, ran away, and then returned. It was not long before the hunters stood in front of the cave. The handsomest among them was the king of that country. He stepped up to Elise. Never had he seen a lovelier maiden. "How earnest thou here, thou beautiful child?" he said. Elise shook her head. She dared not speak. A word might have cost her the life of her brothers, and she hid her hands under her apron lest the king should see how she was suffering. "Come with me," he said. "Thou must not stay here. If thou art good, thou art beautiful. I will dress thee in velvet and silk. I will put a gold crown upon thy head, and thou shalt dwell in my palace." So he lifted her upon his horse, while she wept and wrung her hands. But the king said, "I only desire thy happiness. Thou shalt thank me for this some day." That's what all king doth say. And away he rode with her over the mountains and valleys, holding her on the front of his horse, whilst the other hunters followed. When the sun set, the king's magnificent capital with its churches and cupolas lay before them, and the king led Elise into the palace, where, in the high marble hall, fountains were playing, and the walls and ceilings displayed the most beautiful paintings. But Elise cared not for all this splendor. She wept and mourned in silence, even while some female attendants dressed her in royal robes and wove costly pearls into her hair and drove soft gloves over her blistered hands. And now she was fully dressed, and as she stood in the splendid attire, her beauty was so dazzling that the courtiers all bowed low before her, and the king chose her for his bride. Although the archbishop shook his head and whispered that the beautiful lady of the wood must certainly be a witch who had blinded their eyes and infatuated the king's heart, as archbishops would do. But the king did not listen, as kings do. He ordered that music should be played. A sumptuous banquet was served up, and the loveliest maidens danced around the bride. She was led through the fragrant gardens into magnificent halls, but did not smile. No smile was seen to play upon her lips, or beam from her eyes. The king then opened a small room next to her sleeping apartment. It was adorned with costly green tapestry, and exactly resembled the cave in which she had been found. Upon the ground lay a bundle of yarn which she had spun from the nettles, and by the wall hung a shirt she had completed. One of the hunters had brought all this, thinking there must be something wonderful about it. Clever boy. Here thou mayest dream of thy former home, said the king. Here is the work which employed thee. Amidst all that present splendor, it may sometimes give thee pleasure to fancy thyself there again. When Elise saw what was so dear to her heart, she smiled, and the blood returned to her cheeks. She thought her brothers might still be released, and she kissed the king's hand. He pressed her to his heart and ordered the bells of all the churches in their city to be rung, to announce the celebration of their wedding. The beautiful dumb maiden of the wood was to become queen of the land. The archbishop whispered evil words to the king's ear, but they made no impression upon him. The marriage was solemnized, and the archbishop himself was obliged to put a crown upon her head. In his rage he pressed the narrow rim so firmly on her forehead that it hurt her. But the heavier weight, sorrow for her brothers, lay upon her heart. She did not feel bodily pain. She was still silent. A single word would have killed her brothers. Her eyes, however, beamed with more heartfelt love for the king, so good and handsome, who had done so much to make her happy. She became more warmly attached to him every day. Oh, how much she wished she might confide to him all of her sorrows. But she was forced to remain silent. She could not speak until her work was completed. To this end, she stole away every night and went into the little room that was fitted with an imitation of her cave. There she worked on her shirts, and by the time she had begun the seventh, all her yarn was spent. She knew the nettles she needed grew in the churchyard, but she must gather them herself. How was she to get them? Oh, what the pain in the fingers compared to the anguish of the heart suffered, she thought. I must venture to the churchyard. The good God will not withdraw his protection from me. Fearful as though she were about to do something wrong, one moonlight night she crept down to the garden. Through the long avenues she got into the lonely road leading to the churchyard. She saw sitting on one of the broadest tombstones a number of ugly old witches. They took off their ragged clothes as if they were going to bathe, and digging in their long, lean fingers into the fresh grass, drew up dead bodies and devoured the flesh. Tasty. Elise was obliged to pass close by them, and the witches fixed their wicked eyes upon her. But she repeated her prayer and gathered the singing nettles, and took them back with her to the palace. Only one person had seen her. It was the Archbishop. He was not awake when the others slept. Now he was convinced that all was not right about the Queen. She must be a witch who had thought her enchantments infatuating the king and all the people. In the confessional, he told the king what he had seen and what he feared. And when the slanderous words came from his lips, the sculptured image of the saints shook their heads as though they would say, "This is untrue. Elise is innocent." But the archbishop explained the omen quite otherwise. He thought it was testimony against her that the holy images shook their heads at hearing her sin. Two large tears rolled down the king's cheeks. He returned home in doubt. He pretended to sleep at night, though sleep never visited him. And he noticed that Elise rose from her bed every night, and every time he followed her secretly and saw her enter her little room. His countenance became darker every day. He perceived it, though she knew not the cause. She was much pained, and besides, what did she not suffer in her heart for her brothers? Her bitter tears ran down on the royal velvet and purple. They looked like bright diamonds, and all who saw the magnificence that surrounded her wished themselves in her place. She had now nearly finished her work. Only one shirt was wanting. Unfortunately, yarn was wanting too. She had not a single nettle left. Once more, only this one time, she must go to the churchyard and gather a few handfuls. She shuddered when she thought of the solitary work and of the horrid witches, but her resolution was as firm as her trust in God. Elise went. The king and the archbishop followed her. They saw her disappear at the churchyard door, and when they came near, they saw the witches sitting on the tombstones as Elise had seen them. And the king was turned away, for he believed her whose head had rested on his bosom that very evening to be among them. "Let the people judge her," he said, and the people condemned her to be burnt. She was now dragged from the king's sumptuous apartments into the dark, damp prison, where the wind whistled through the grated window. Instead of velvet and silk, they gave her a bundle of nettles which she had gathered. On that she must lay her head. The shirts she had woven must serve her as a mattress and counterpane. But they could not have given her anything she valued so much, and she continued her work, at the same time praying earnestly to her God. The boys sang scandalous songs about her in front of the prison. Not a soul comforted her with a word of love. Toward the evening she heard the rustling of swans' wings at the grating. It was the youngest of her brothers, who had at last found his sister, and she sobbed aloud for joy, although she knew the coming night would probably be the last of her life. But then her work was almost finished, and her brother was near. The archbishop came in order to spend the last hour with her. He had promised the king he would, but she shook her head and entreated him with her eyes and gestured to go. This night she must finish her work. For all that she suffered, her pain, her anxiety, her sleepless nights would be in vain. The archbishop went away with many angry words, but the unfortunate Elise knew herself to be perfectly innocent, and went on with her work. Little mice ran busily about, and dragged the nettles to her feet, wishing to help her. The thrush perched on the iron bars of the windows and sang all night as merrily as he could, that Elise would not lose courage. It was still twilight, just 1 hour before sunrise, when the 11 brothers stood before the palace gates, requesting an audience with the king. But it could not be, they were told. It was still night. The king was asleep. and they dared not wake him. They entreated, they threatened. The guard came up, and the king himself at last stepped out to see what was the matter. At that moment the sun rose. The brothers could no longer be seen, and only 11 white swans flew away over the palace. The people poured forth from the gates into the city. They wished to see the witch burnt. One wretched horse drew the cart in which Elise was placed. A coarse frock of sackcloth had been put on her. Her beautiful long hair hung loosely over her shoulders. Her cheeks wore a deathly paleness. Her lips moved gently, and her fingers wove the green yarn. Even on the way to her cruel death, she did not give up her work. The 10 shirts lay at her feet. She was now laboring to complete the 11th. The rabble insulted her. "Look at the witch! How she mutters! She has not a hymn book in her hand. No, she sits with that cursed hocus pocus. Tear it from her! Tear it from her in 1,000 pieces!" And they all crowded about her, and were on the point of snatching away the shirts, when 11 white swans came flying towards the cart. They all settled around her and flapped their wings. The crowd gave way in terror. "It's a sign from heaven. She's certainly innocent," whispered some. They dared not say it aloud. The sheriff now seized her by the hand. In a moment she threw the 11 shirts over the swans, and 11 handsome princes appeared in their place. The youngest had, however, only one arm, and the wing instead of the other, for one sleeve was deficient on the shirt, and it was not quite finished. "Now I may speak," she said. "I am innocent." And the people who had seen what had happened bowed before her, as before a saint. She, however, sank lifeless in her brother's arms. Suspense, fear, and grief had quite exhausted her. "Yes, she is innocent," said the eldest brother, and he now related their wonderful story. Whilst he spoke, a fragrance as delicious as though it proceeded of millions of roses diffused itself about the air, for every piece of wood in the funeral pile had taken root and had sent forth branches, and a hedge of blooming red roses surrounded Elise, and above all others blossomed a flower of dazzling white color, as bright as a star. The king plucked it and laid it on Elise's bosom, whereupon she woke from her trance with peace and joy in her heart. And all the church bells began to ring of their own accord, and the birds flew to the spot in swarms, and there was a festive procession back to the palace, such as no king has ever again equaled. Now, I know we have heard that story several times. That is one of the things about fairy tales. They're told everywhere, and they are often adapted by the countries that they're told in. Because we know that we've read another version of it where it was 7 brothers, and the sister was unable to speak and was threatened to have multiple kids and was accused of eating him as the queen and as a witch. But fairy tales in different regions get different translations and whatnot. I think that one's been covered in both the Grimm Brothers, and I think I had it in the Norse fairy tales as well. But fairy tales and their regionality. But let's see, I did make it through the stories. It's only an hour and a half. Not sure if I could make it through another one, honestly. But let's see if we can find someone to raid. Desk zone. We could go ahead and hit up altered. Yeah, let's go raid altered. No, he's reading stories too, so. So, thank you all for being here and wonderful lurkers and all that stuff. And again, thank you for coming in. And glad you're all here. And thank you for coming by and listening. We're going to go ahead and go listen to Altered and have him tell his stories. So, we will see you all later. Eventually, I will come up with a raid message. But today is not that day. I'm doing good to be able to read right now. Rafe. Rafe Shadow Legends. Oh. What? Okay, that's it. There we go. So, have a good night, Cubs. Pleasant dreams. Talk to you later. Night.